Hey there, fellow Canadians, let's talk about something that's been making headlines lately. Pierre Poilievre's Canada First TFSA top-up proposal. Now, I know what you're thinking. Taxes? Savings? Sounds about as exciting as watching paint dry, but trust me, this one's got some juice. In a nutshell, Poilievre wants to give Canadians a bigger incentive to invest in our own backyard. How? By sweetening the deal on tax-free savings accounts, TFSAs. We're talking about cranking up the annual contribution limit by a cool $5,000. That's right, folks, from $7,000 to a whopping $12,000 you can stash away tax-free year after year. But here's the catch. There's always a catch, right? This bonus top-up only applies if you park your hard-earned loonies in Canadian companies. That's right, Poilievre's pitching this as a win-win. You get to watch your savings grow tax-free, and Canadian businesses get a much-needed cash injection. Sounds simple enough, eh? Well, hold your horses. As with most things in the world of finance, the devil is in the details. So buckle up, buttercups, because we're about to dive deep into the nitty-gritty of this TFSA shakeup. Before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a quick snapshot of the current TFSA scene. Now, TFSAs have been around for a while, and a lot of Canadians have jumped on board. We're talking roughly 18 million people who've opened these accounts, hoping to see their savings blossom without the taxman taking a bite. But here's the kicker. Out of those 18 million, only a small fraction are actually maxing out their contributions. We're talking about a measly 8%, or about 1.5 million Canadians, who are pumping in the full $7,000 annually. Now, there are a few reasons for this. For some folks, it's simply a matter of affordability. They're busy making ends meet, putting food on the table, and keeping a roof over their heads. Saving an extra $7,000 a year? That's a luxury they just can't swing. Then there are those who are sitting on a pile of cash, but haven't quite wrapped their heads around TFSAs. Maybe they're intimidated by the whole investing thing or haven't gotten around to opening an account. Whatever the reason, there's a whole lot of untapped potential when it comes to TFSA contributions. Now, back to Poilievre's grand plan. The whole idea behind this TFSA top-up is to funnel billions of dollars into Canadian companies. The logic goes something like this. More money sloshing around in the Canadian economy means more investment in factories, equipment, and good old-fashioned Canadian jobs. Poilievre's banking on this influx of cash to boost economic growth, create jobs, and generally make Canada a more prosperous place to live, work, and, well, do business. It's a classic case of putting your money where your mouth is, or in this case, where your TFSA is. But hold on a minute. While injecting billions into the economy sounds great on paper, the reality is a bit more complicated. You see, most stock market transactions don't actually involve companies directly receiving money. It's not like you hand over your cash to a company in exchange for a share of their profits. This is where things get a little technical, so bear with me. When you buy a stock on the stock market, you're usually buying it from another investor, not the company itself. This is what's known as the secondary market. Think of it like buying a used car. You're not giving your money to the car manufacturer, you're giving it to the previous owner. So, if most stock market transactions happen on the secondary market, how does this whole TFSA top-up actually benefit Canadian companies? Well, it's all about supply and demand, my friends. And Section 5, the ripple effect, indirect benefits of a bullish market. When more people are buying Canadian stocks, the demand for those stocks goes up. And when demand goes up, so does the price. This is what's known as a bull market. And you know, a bull market can have a whole bunch of indirect benefits for companies. For starters, companies with higher stock prices tend to have an easier time borrowing money from banks and other lenders. Think of it like this. Would you rather lend money to someone who's flush with cash or someone who's struggling to make ends meet? Lenders are the same way. They're more likely to throw money at companies that are perceived as being successful and profitable. Not only that, but companies with soaring stock prices often find it easier to attract top talent. After all, who wouldn't want to work for a company that's going places? Stock options and other equity-based compensation packages become much more enticing when the company's stock is on an upward trajectory. Section 6. Defining Canadian companies, navigating the gray areas. So, we've established that Poilievre's TFSA top-up could potentially benefit Canadian companies, even if it's through a roundabout way. But here's where things get a little fuzzy. What exactly constitutes a Canadian company? It's a question that sparked a lot of debate and head-scratching. Some folks reckon it's pretty straightforward. If a company's headquarters are on Canadian soil, it's a Canadian company. But what about companies that are headquartered here but generate most of their revenue from other countries? Then there's the issue of ownership. Does a company need to be majority owned by Canadians to qualify? And what about companies that are listed on both Canadian and foreign stock exchanges? As you can see, it's a bit of a tangled web. The definition of a Canadian company is crucial to the success or failure of Poilievre's plan. If the criteria are too narrow, it could limit the impact of the policy and discourage Canadians from taking advantage of the TFSA top-up. But if the definition is too broad, it could open the door to loopholes and unintended consequences. Section 7, the Great Canadian Market Debate. Can it compete with the US? Now let's talk about the elephant in the room, the performance of the Canadian stock market. Historically speaking, the Canadian market has lagged behind its southern counterpart, the US stock market. There are a bunch of reasons for this, including the relative size of the two economies and the types of companies that make up each market. Some critics of Poilievre's plan argue that by encouraging Canadians to invest more heavily in Canadian companies, we're essentially limiting our investment options and potentially sacrificing returns. After all, if the Canadian market isn't performing as well as other markets, why not put our money where the growth is? It's a valid point, but it's not quite that simple. Diversification is key to any sound investment strategy, and that means spreading your bets across different asset classes, sectors, and yes, even countries. While it's true that the US market has historically outperformed the Canadian market, that doesn't mean Canadian investors should completely ignore their home turf. Section 8. The accessibility question. Will average Canadians reap the rewards? Let's circle back to the average Canadian for a moment. While Poilievre's TFSA top-up might sound like a sweet deal, the reality is that it primarily benefits those who are already in a position to max out their TFSA contributions. Remember, only 8% of current TFSA holders are hitting that $7,000 limit. For the vast majority of Canadians who are struggling to make ends meet or simply haven't prioritized saving for retirement, this policy doesn't move the needle. They're not going to magically find an extra $5,000 lying around just because the TFSA limit has been increased. In fact, some critics argue that this policy could actually exacerbate wealth inequality. By giving a tax break to those who are already doing well financially, we're essentially widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots. It's a classic case of the rich getting richer while the rest of us are left scrambling to keep up. Section 9, Gimmick or Game Changer, weighing the pros and cons. So there you have it, folks. Pierre Poilievre's Canada First TFSA top-up proposal, a policy that's as complex as it is controversial. On the surface, it sounds like a win-win boost to Canadian businesses while helping Canadians save for their golden years. But as we've seen, the devil is in the details. There's no doubt that this policy has the potential to drive investment into the Canadian economy and create jobs. But there are also concerns about its effectiveness, its impact on market returns, and its accessibility to average Canadians. Ultimately, whether this proposal is a game changer or just another political gimmick remains to be seen. Only time will tell if it delivers on its promises or simply widens the gap between the rich and the rest of us. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and happy investing.